The crack of an M4 charging handle echoed across the firing range at Naval Base San Diego, sharp as a blade cutting through the thick August heat. 180 personnel stood in formation. On the firing line, most of them SEAL selection candidates with shoulders squared and eyes locked on targets 300 meters downrange. The California sun hammered down on their backs, turning sweat into streams that carved lines through the dust on their faces. Who authorized a tattoo shop to set up business on my range? Instructor Daniel's voice detonated across the deck like a flashbang grenade. He stood 6 feet 3 inches tall, all coiled muscle, and barely contained aggression, glaring down at a woman half his size. She wore navy blue logistics coveralls that hung loose on her small frame, her fingers white-knuckled around a battered metal clipboard. On her right wrist, just visible beneath the rolled cuff of her sleeve, a small butterfly tattoo spread its wings in black ink. The laughter came fast and brutal. A trainee twice her weight jabbed his buddy's ribs and bellowed loud enough for everyone to hear. "What's she gonna do, flutter at the Taliban?" The ripple of mockery spread through the ranks like wildfire through dry grass. Someone whistled. Another voice joined in. "Maybe she'll distract them with interpretive dance." Petty Officer Third Class. Maya Chen did not respond. She stood motionless, brown eyes fixed straight ahead, at nothing in particular, her jaw so tight the muscles jumped beneath her skin. No defense, no explanation, no movement except the slight tremor in her hands that made the papers on her clipboard vibrate. Daniel stepped closer, invading her space with the practiced cruelty of someone who knew exactly how to break people without laying a hand on them. His voice dropped to a stage whisper that still carried to every ear on the range. "Desk sailors like you don't belong out here with real warriors. You should stick to your paperwork and your keyboards, where you can't get hurt." Maya swallowed hard, her throat working visibly. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. She said nothing. The silence stretched out between them like a wire pulled to its breaking point. Not one person in that formation knew that within 20 minutes everything would change. Not one of them understood they were mocking the sole survivor of one of the darkest missions in SEAL history. And not even Captain Morrison, watching from the observation tower, with his arms crossed and his face unreadable, had any idea that the butterfly on Maya Chen's wrist was not a decoration purchased from some boardwalk shop. It was proof of a secret only 12 living people in the world could recognize. Maya's fingers loosened fractionally on the clipboard. She took one breath, then another, each one measured and controlled. Around her the laughter continued, but she had already learned to let it roll over her like waves breaking on stone. This was not the worst thing she had endured, not even close. The hardest part was remembering to seem weak when every instinct she possessed screamed to stand tall and fight back. But fighting back was not the mission. The mission required patience. It required silence. It required her to be invisible while she watched and waited and documented everything. So, Maya Chen stood very still, with her butterfly tattoo, exposed to the mockery of 180 warriors who had no idea what it meant. And she said absolutely nothing at all. Before we continue with Maya's story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss stories of courage, sacrifice, and the warriors who serve in silence. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from today, and if you've ever witnessed someone being underestimated only to prove everyone wrong. Now, let's get back to the firing range where Maya's quiet endurance is about to be tested in ways no one expected. The formation finally broke apart with Daniel's dismissal, his voice sharp with contempt as he waved Maya away like she was something unpleasant he'd found stuck to his boot. She turned without a word and walked back toward the ammunition depot warehouse, her steps measured and careful. The clipboard trembled against her chest, but her posture remained upright, despite the weight of all those watching eyes. Behind her, voices continued their assessment with the casual cruelty of people who believed themselves superior. Did you see her hands shaking? Probably never even held a rifle. 3 years in logistics and she thinks that tattoo makes her tough. Butterflies, honestly. Now what's next? Rainbows and unicorns. Maya kept walking. Her jaw ached from clenching her teeth, but she let none of it show on her face. The warehouse loomed ahead, a massive corrugated metal structure that housed enough ammunition to level a small city. She shouldered through the personnel door, and let it clang shut behind her, finally cutting off the voices and the laughter and the brutal California sun. Inside, the temperature dropped 15 degrees. Shadows stretched between towers of wooden pallets, stacked with ammunition crates, marked with stenciled warnings in 3 languages. The air smelled like gun oil and cardboard, and the particular metallic tang that came from thousands of rounds of brass-jacketed ammunition stored in close quarters. Maya stood alone in the silence for 5 heartbeats, letting her breathing slow to normal. Then she walked to her small desk, wedged into a corner between 2 ammunition racks, and carefully set down the clipboard. Her hands were steadier now, without an audience watching for weakness. She pulled a pen from her breast pocket and began completing the ammunition count, with perfect, precise handwriting that never wavered despite what had just happened outside. Each number went into its designated box on the form. Each calculation checked out exactly. The work was methodical, boring beneath the capabilities of someone with her training and absolutely necessary to maintain her cover. This was how she had spent 3 months. Counting bullets, filing paperwork, enduring mockery, watching. The warehouse door crashed open with enough force to rattle the metal walls. Maya's hand moved automatically to her hip, where no weapon hung, then forced itself back to the clipboard as trainee Rodriguez swaggered in with 3 of his buddies, trailing behind like remoras following a shark. Rodriguez stood 6'2" and carried 230 pounds of muscle earned through obsessive gym sessions and pharmaceutical assistance he thought nobody knew about. He had cold blue eyes and a smile that never reached them, the kind of predator who had learned early that size and aggression could get him most of what he wanted in life. He stopped directly in Maya's path as she attempted to move past him toward the ammunition racks. His shadow fell across her like a threat. "Heading somewhere, butterfly girl." His voice dripped false sweetness. "Careful out there on that dangerous journey to count bullets. Real warriors train on that range. Wouldn't want you to get confused and wander into actual danger." His friends laughed on cue. One of them, a trainee named Kowalski, with a neck like a tree trunk, leaned against a pallet of ammunition and grinned. "Maybe she's writing poetry in that little notebook. Butterfly haikus." Maya stopped walking but did not meet their eyes. She stood with her head slightly bowed, shoulders hunched inward, making herself smaller. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, I need to complete the inventory." "You need to complete the inventory," Rodriguez mimicked in a high-pitched mockery of her voice. "What you need is to understand your place, clerk. This is a military base, not some corporate office where you can hide behind a desk and pretend you're serving your country." He reached out and flicked the edge of her clipboard, sending the papers fluttering. Maya caught them with reflexes that were just a fraction too fast, too controlled, before she remembered to fumble and drop one sheet. It spiraled to the concrete floor. She bent to retrieve it, and as she did, Rodriguez deliberately stepped on the paper, his boot grinding it into the dust and oil stains. "Oops," he said, without an ounce of sincerity. "Clumsy me." Maya's fingers tightened on the clipboard until the metal edges bit into her palms. For just 1 second, her stance shifted imperceptibly into something more balanced, more ready the way a trained fighter automatically positions themselves when threatened. Then she caught herself and forced her shoulders back into that defeated hunch. She tugged the paper from beneath his boot without looking up, whispered, "Excuse me," again, and stepped around him toward the racks. But Rodriguez was not finished. "That tattoo," he called after her, his voice echoing in the warehouse space. "Where'd you get it? Spring break in Cabo drunken mistake you regret every morning." Maya kept walking. Her back was rigid now, despite her best efforts to appear weak. Behind her, she heard Kowalski laugh and say something about butterflies being attracted to garbage, followed by more laughter that chased her deeper into the shadows between the ammunition towers. She did not stop until she reached the far corner of the warehouse where the oldest inventory sat, gathering dust. Only then did she allow herself one slow breath, one moment, where her facade cracked just enough to let the anger through. Her hand moved unconsciously to the tattoo on her wrist, fingers tracing the outline of wings that concealed so much more than these men would ever understand. Then she picked up her pen and went back to counting bullets because that was the mission, and Maya Chen had never failed a mission in her life. The hours bled together in the warehouse gloom. Maya worked through the afternoon inventory with machine-like precision, her pen marking numbers in neat columns that would have made any accountant proud. Twice more groups of trainees passed through on their way to or from the range, and twice more she heard comments about butterflies and desk sailors and people who did not belong. She documented every comment in a separate notebook she kept hidden beneath the false bottom of her desk drawer. Times names when she knew them, exact words spoken. The notebook was already half full. By the time her investigation concluded, it would provide a complete picture of the culture of harassment that permeated this training facility, along with evidence of something far more dangerous hiding beneath the surface mockery. At 1700 hours, the shift change brought Petty Officer Lisa Martinez into the warehouse. Lisa was 26 rail thin, with worried eyes that darted around like she expected something bad to happen at any moment. She had learned early in her career that keeping her head down was the only way to survive, and she had made an art of invisibility. She spotted Maya and hurried over, her voice dropping to a whisper, even though they were alone. "You okay? I heard what Daniel said on the range. That was messed up." Maya gave her a small smile, the kind that did not quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine. Just finishing the ammunition count." "You're always fine," Lisa said, frustration creeping into her whisper. "You're always just finishing something or starting something or doing whatever they tell you to do while they treat you like dirt. Don't you ever want to tell them where to shove their orders? That wouldn't help anything." Maya's voice remained calm, almost flat. "I have a job to do. I'm going to do it." Lisa shook her head, but did not argue further. She had learned that Maya Chen was possibly the most stubborn person she had ever met, though it was a quiet stubbornness that most people mistook for weakness. "Just be careful. Okay, Rodriguez has been bragging about making you quit. He's taking bets on how long until you request a transfer." "I'm not transferring." Maya turned back to her inventory sheets. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Lisa opened her mouth to respond, then closed it and walked away, shaking her head. She did not understand, and Maya could not explain. The fewer people who knew the truth, the safer everyone would be. As the evening shadows lengthened across the warehouse floor, Maya found herself alone again. The base settled into its nighttime rhythm, most personnel heading to the chow hall or their barracks. The warehouse was scheduled to close at 1800 hours, but Maya had one more task before she could leave. She pulled a ring of keys from her pocket and unlocked a secured cage at the back of the warehouse where sensitive materials were stored separately. Inside, beneath layers of legitimate inventory, sat 3 boxes marked with innocuous supply codes that meant nothing to anyone who did not know what to look for. Maya opened the top box and removed a single manila folder. She did not open it here where security cameras might capture something they should not see. Instead, she tucked it under her clipboard, relocked the cage, and made her way to the warehouse office. The office was a cramped space with a single desk, a filing cabinet, and walls covered in safety posters that had been there since before Maya arrived. She locked the door behind her, pulled the faded blinds closed, and only then allowed herself to open the folder. Inside were photographs, surveillance images taken over the past 3 months, showing patterns of behavior that looked innocent individually, but formed a damning picture when viewed together. Daniel's meeting with someone in civilian clothes at a coffee shop off base. Rodriguez receiving packages that were never logged through official channels. Lieutenant Briggs making phone calls from her personal cell during duty hours to numbers that traced back to dummy corporations. Maya added today's notes to the growing file, her handwriting as precise in documentation as it was on ammunition inventory sheets. Every interaction, every suspicious behavior, every piece of evidence that would eventually form an unbreakable chain connecting these individuals to a network selling SEAL candidate information to foreign intelligence services. She had been here 3 months and was maybe 2 weeks from having everything she needed. 2 more weeks of enduring the mockery and the harassment and the casual cruelty of people who saw her as beneath them. 2 more weeks of being Maya Chen, the weak logistics clerk, instead of the person she really was. She could last 2 more weeks. She had survived far worse for far longer. Maya closed the folder, returned it to its hiding place beneath the legitimate office supplies in the filing cabinet, and unlocked the door. The warehouse was dark now, except for the emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of red and shadow. Her footsteps echoed as she made her way toward the exit. She was almost to the door when it burst open with enough force to slam against the interior wall. Instructor Daniels filled the doorway, backlit by the floodlights from the range, his face twisted with irritation. "Chen, what are you still doing here?" He did not wait for an answer. "Doesn't matter. I need 2,000 rounds of 5.56 loaded into magazines by 0600 tomorrow. That's your job now. Maya's mind calculated automatically. 2,000 rounds. 80 magazines of 30 rounds each minus the 2 rounds per magazine that doctrine recommended leaving out to preserve spring tension. 78 magazines at roughly 3 minutes per magazine for careful loading checking and quality control. 390 minutes. 6.5 hours of continuous work with no breaks. She had completed her shift. This task should have been assigned to the night crew. Daniels was deliberately setting her up with an impossible deadline. Yes, instructor, Maya said quietly. I'll complete it. Daniels' eyes narrowed like he had expected an argument and was disappointed not to get one. You understand, if those magazines aren't ready when the candidates arrive for qualification tomorrow, it's your career on the line, not mine. Yours. I understand. Good. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. Maybe you'll learn your place faster if you spend a few nights doing real work instead of hiding behind that clipboard. Dismissed. The door clanged shut behind him, leaving Maya alone in the red-lit warehouse with 6.5 hours of work and 8 hours until deadline. The math was possible, but only if she worked straight through without rest food or mistakes. She walked back to the ammunition cage, unlocked it again, and began pulling down cases of ammunition. Each case weighed 35 pounds. She needed 67 cases to make 2,000 rounds. That was 2,345 pounds of ammunition to move before she even started the loading process. Maya worked in silence, her movements economical and precise. She stacked the cases near one of the loading benches, then began the methodical process of opening magazines, counting out rounds, pressing them into place with the loading tool. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency that came from thousands of repetitions, muscle memory that had been trained into her over years of work that had nothing to do with logistics. The loading tool clicked rhythmically in the silence. Click, click, click. 28 rounds into a 30-round magazine. Check the spring tension. Visual inspection of each round for defects. Stack the completed magazine. Begin again. At 2300 hours, Lisa Martinez returned to the warehouse with a sandwich and a bottle of water. She found Maya still working now, surrounded by stacks of completed magazines that formed neat rows on the loading bench. I heard what Daniels did, Lisa said, setting down the food within Maya's reach. This is a 2-person job minimum. He's trying to make you fail. I know. Maya did not stop working. Click, click, click. You've been here 7 hours already. You're going to work all night. If that's what it takes. Lisa watched her for a long moment, then pulled up a stool and picked up a second loading tool. Then I'm staying too. We'll split it. Maya's hands paused for just a second. She looked at Lisa with something that might have been gratitude in her eyes. You don't have to do that. This isn't your problem. Maybe not. But I'm tired of watching good people get crushed by bullies. Lisa started loading her first magazine with movements that were clumsy compared to Maya's practiced efficiency. Show me the technique. We'll get through this together. They worked in companionable silence for the next 3 hours. The only sounds the rhythmic clicking of loading tools and the occasional instruction from Maya when Lisa struggled with a particular magazine. The pile of completed magazines grew steadily, and by 0300 hours, they had finished 65 of the required 80. That was when Gunnery Sergeant Thompson walked in. Thompson was a Marine on temporary assignment to the Navy base, overseeing some kind of joint ammunition handling protocol that Maya had never quite understood the details of. He was 52 years old, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that missed nothing. He had been doing this job since before most of the current SEAL candidates were born. He stopped at the edge of the workspace and watched Maya's hands move through the loading sequence. His expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe just professional appreciation for someone who clearly knew what they were doing. You've done this before, he said. It was not a question. A lot more than some logistics clerk should have. Maya's hands did not falter in their rhythm. Just following the manual, Gunny. The manual doesn't teach that speed or that precision. He moved closer, studying her technique with the focused attention of an expert evaluating another expert. Your finger positioning is off book. It's better than what we teach, more efficient, but it's not standard. Where'd you learn it? Practice? Maya's voice remained flat and neutral, giving nothing away. Thompson grunted, clearly unsatisfied with the answer, but unwilling to push further. He watched for another minute, then said, You need help finishing this. We've got it, Gunny, thank you. Yabachi nodded slowly, his eyes lingering on the butterfly tattoo that showed every time Maya reached for another round of ammunition. His expression suggested he was thinking about something, working through a puzzle in his mind, but he did not voice whatever conclusions he was reaching. All right then, carry on. He turned to leave, then paused at the door and looked back. Chen, that work you're doing, it's good work, professional grade. Don't let the bastards convince you otherwise. Then he was gone, leaving Maya and Lisa alone, with the clicking of loading tools and the weight of unspoken questions hanging in the air. They finished the last magazine at 05:45 minutes before deadline. Maya stacked them in the designated transport cases, checked each one twice, and filled out the required paperwork with her usual meticulous attention to detail. By 0600 hours, when Daniels arrived to inspect the work with clear expectations of finding it incomplete, every magazine sat ready for the day's qualification exercises. He said nothing, just grunted and walked away, but Maya saw the flash of disappointment in his eyes and noted it mentally for the growing file of observations that would eventually bury him. The morning formation gathered on the range at 0700 hours, and Maya stood among them with less than 2 hours of sleep, but no visible signs of exhaustion. She had learned long ago how to function on minimal rest, how to keep her body moving when every muscle screamed for recovery. This was nothing compared to some of the operations she had endured. Captain Morrison conducted the morning briefing with his usual brisk efficiency, outlining the day's training schedule and safety protocols. Maya stood in the back row, clipboard in hand, taking notes that nobody would ever read because they were just part of maintaining her cover, as a diligent but unremarkable clerk. The qualification exercises began with rifle marksmanship candidates firing in groups of 6, while instructors watched from behind their eyes, sharp for any deviation from proper technique. Maya's assignment was to track ammunition expenditure and collect spent brass casings, the kind of tedious labor that nobody else wanted to do. She moved through the firing positions with her head down and her eyes on the ground, gathering brass into a collection bag, while around her the sharp crack of M4s split the air in controlled 3-round bursts. The smell of burnt powder filled her lungs, familiar and almost comforting in its associations with training and purpose. She was bent over collecting casings near firing position 3 when trainee Kowalski deliberately kicked a spray of hot brass in her direction. The spent casings bounced off her legs and arms, several still warm enough to sting through the fabric of her coveralls. "Oops," Kowalski said, without looking at her. "Didn't see you down there in the dirt where you belong, butterfly." Maya said nothing. She simply collected the brass he had kicked, added it to her bag, and moved to the next position. Behind her she heard laughter and a few more comments about desk sailors and people who should not be allowed on a real military facility. The morning wore on with brutal efficiency. The sun climbed higher, turning the firing range into a furnace that baked the concrete until it shimmered with heat waves. Maya worked through it without complaint, moving from position to position, collecting brass and ignoring mockery until she had become as invisible as furniture. At 11:30 hours, the ammunition inventory system experienced what would later be documented as a routine equipment malfunction. One of the ruggedized tablet computers used to track ordnance suddenly displayed error codes that locked out all access to the current count. Senior Chief Walker, the weapons specialist in charge of the armory, attempted to resolve the issue for 15 minutes before admitting defeat and calling Maya over. His voice was sharp with irritation. "Chen, you're supposed to know these systems. Figure out what's wrong with this tablet before we fall behind schedule." Maya took the device and examined it with the same careful attention she brought to everything else. Her fingers moved across the screen, navigating through menus and system diagnostics with a speed that suggested far more familiarity than a simple logistics clerk should possess. The error codes were actually masking a deliberate attempt to access secured files, something she noted immediately, but gave no outward sign of recognizing. Within 4 minutes, she had cleared the false error messages, restored access to the inventory system, and identified the fingerprints of whoever had attempted the unauthorized access. The information went into her mental file for later documentation. "Fixed," she said, simply handing the tablet back to Walker. He stared at the device, then at her, his expression hovering somewhere between suspicion and reluctant respect. "How did you do that? That error sequence should have required a complete system reset and IT intervention." "The manual has troubleshooting protocols," Maya said, which was technically true, even though what she had actually done had nothing to do with any manual. Walker's eyes narrowed. I've been using these systems for 8 years, Chen. I know what the manual says. What you just did isn't in any manual I've ever seen. Maya said nothing, just stood waiting for dismissal, with her eyes downcast and her posture submissive. The silence stretched out uncomfortably until Walker finally waved her away with a gesture that suggested he had more questions than he was willing to ask in front of the trainees who were watching the interaction. The ammunition inventory system Maya operated required specialized ruggedized tablet computers designed for extreme military environments. These enterprise-grade mobile devices featured military-spec encryption, shock-resistant casings, rated for 6-foot drops, and daylight-readable screens that functioned flawlessly, even under the intense California sun of the firing range. With battery life exceeding 12 hours and instant satellite connectivity, such professional tablets enabled real-time munitions tracking across multiple weapons platforms. The integration of advanced biometric authentication ensured that only authorized personnel could access classified ordnance data, while the waterproof construction meant these devices continued operating even in the harshest conditions SEALs might encounter during amphibious operations. That afternoon brought a new challenge in the form of Lieutenant Commander Briggs, the administrative officer who oversaw personnel assignments and managed to find fault with nearly everything Maya did despite her flawless work record. Briggs was 32 rail thin, with blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face and eyes that held more jealousy than genuine authority. She cornered Maya in the warehouse at 1400 hours, appearing suddenly from between ammunition racks like a predator that had been stalking its prey. Her voice dripped with false concern that barely masked the hostility underneath. "Petty Officer Chen, we need to discuss your uniform compliance." She gestured at Maya's rolled sleeves. "That tattoo is visible. Regulations state that body art must be covered during duty hours." Maya looked down at her wrist, where the butterfly spread its wings against her skin. "The tattoo is within regulation size parameters, ma'am. It does not extend beyond the wrist area, as defined in—" "I don't care about the size," Briggs interrupted, her voice rising. "I care about the message it sends. You're representing the United States Navy while working on a SEAL training facility, and you're choosing to display something that makes you look weak and unprofessional in front of real warriors." The insult was deliberate, designed to provoke a reaction that could then be used as evidence of insubordination. Maya had seen this tactic before from officers who ruled through intimidation rather than competence. She kept her voice level and respectful. "I apologize if my appearance has caused concern, ma'am. I'll keep my sleeves rolled down." "You'll do more than that." Briggs stepped closer, lowering her voice to ensure privacy for what came next. "You're making waves, Chen. I've noticed the way some of the trainees focus on you, the disruption you're causing to unit cohesion. Maybe logistics isn't the right place for someone who can't maintain proper professional standards. Maybe you'd be better suited to a desk job somewhere far from operational personnel. Translation: quit, or I'll make your life miserable until you do." Maya met her eyes directly for just a moment, long enough to show she understood the threat, but not long enough to be considered challenging authority. "I'm committed to serving wherever the Navy assigns me, ma'am." Briggs's expression hardened. "We'll see how committed you are after your next performance review. Dismissed." Maya snapped to attention, executed a perfect salute that was just formal enough to border on mockery, and returned to her work. Behind her, Briggs stood fuming for a long moment before stalking away with her heels clicking sharply on the concrete floor. Another interaction documented. Another piece of evidence showing the systematic harassment designed to force certain personnel out of positions where they might see things that should remain hidden. Briggs was on the list of suspects, though Maya had not yet confirmed whether her hostility stemmed from simple prejudice or something more dangerous. The answer came 3 hours later when Maya returned to her locker at shift change and found it hanging open, the lock cut cleanly through with bolt cutters. Inside, her uniforms had been shredded with a knife boot sliced open and personal items scattered across the locker room floor. Someone had taken the time to cut her belongings into ribbons, a message that was clear even without words attached. Lisa appeared beside her, gasping at the destruction. "Oh no, Maya, we need to report this. This is don't." Maya's voice was calm, despite the anger burning in her chest. "I'll handle it. Handle it how this is criminal destruction of property. Whoever did this should face charges. Charges that will go nowhere because nobody saw anything, and there's no security cameras in the locker rooms. Maya began gathering the ruined uniforms, her movements methodical. Filing a report will just make me look like someone who can't handle pressure. That's exactly what they want. Who's they? Lisa's voice dropped to a whisper. Who are you really afraid of, Maya? Maya met her eyes and saw genuine concern there, along with the first stirrings of suspicion that maybe there was more to quiet Petty Officer Chen than met the eye. But she could not risk bringing Lisa deeper into whatever was happening here. The fewer people who knew the truth, the safer they would be. I'm not afraid of anyone, Maya said, which was both true and the most dangerous lie she had told yet. I just need to do my job. Can you help me get replacement uniforms issued without making a big deal about it? Lisa hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. I'll say you spilled acid during an inventory check. That should cover the damage without raising questions. Thank you. They cleaned up the locker room in silence, disposing of the destroyed items and filing the fabricated incident report that would maintain Maya's cover, while documenting yet another escalation in the pattern of harassment. By the time they finished, the sun was setting outside, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like fire reflected in blood. Maya walked back to her barracks alone, her mind working through the implications of this latest development. The destroyed uniforms represented an escalation from verbal harassment to active sabotage. Someone was getting nervous, maybe sensing that their activities were being watched. They were trying to provoke her into making a mistake, into breaking character, and revealing something she should not. She would not give them that satisfaction. She had come too far and sacrificed too much to blow her cover now over vandalized uniforms and petty intimidation. In her small barracks room, Maya sat on her bunk and pulled out a worn leather journal that had traveled with her through deployments on 3 continents. She did not write in it, often saving the pages for moments when the weight of maintaining her cover became almost too heavy to bear. Tonight qualified, day 93. The pressure increases but holds no surprises. They escalate because they sense something they cannot define. I remain invisible by being too visible, too weak, too perfect a target to be anything other than what I appear. 2 more weeks. I can endure 2 more weeks of anything. The butterfly reminds me why I'm here. Justice takes time. Patience is its own form of warfare. She closed the journal and tucked it back into its hiding place beneath the loose floorboard under her bunk. Then she lay back and stared at the ceiling, letting her mind drift to a place 3 years in the past, to a valley half a world away, where the sound of helicopters had meant salvation, and the weight of a wounded man had nearly broken her spine. Lieutenant Davis had weighed 197 pounds, and she had carried him 3 kilometers through enemy fire with a bullet wound in her shoulder that should have made it impossible. She remembered every step of that nightmare journey, every time she had stumbled and forced herself back upright, every labored breath, as his blood soaked into her uniform and made her hands slippery on his vest straps. He had died 12 minutes before they reached the extraction point, but she had carried him anyway because leaving him behind had not been an option. None of the 6 men who survived that mission knew her real name or had ever seen her face without the tactical mask she had worn throughout the operation. They knew her only as a voice in the darkness, promising them that they would not die in that valley. She had kept that promise for 6 of them. The 7th had died, despite everything she could do, and his death haunted her still. The butterfly tattoo had come later, after the mission had been buried under so many layers of classification that it officially never happened. The design looked delicate and feminine, exactly the kind of tattoo a young woman might get on a whim, without understanding its significance. But hidden in the wings were coordinates that marked the valley where Davis had died. Hidden in the body were numbers that corresponded to the date of the mission. Hidden in the antennae was her call sign from that operation, rendered in a code only a handful of people in the world would recognize. The tattoo was a memorial and a warning and a promise all woven together in ink that would never fade. It marked her as someone who had earned the right to wear it through blood and sacrifice. And every time someone mocked it or called it weak, or suggested she was just a silly girl with bad judgment, she remembered why she had gotten it and found the strength to remain silent. 2 more weeks. She could endure anything for 2 more weeks. Maya closed her eyes and let exhaustion drag her into a fitful sleep, populated by memories of helicopter rotors and distant gunfire and the weight of a dying man in her arms. When she woke 6 hours later, The butterfly still rested on her wrist, and her mission continued exactly as planned. The morning of day 94 began with an Apache helicopter arriving for scheduled armament, loading its rotors still spinning as the pilot conducted post-flight checks. Maya was assigned to lead the ordnance crew, a responsibility that should have gone to someone with more seniority, but had been dumped on her because nobody else wanted to work in the brutal midday heat. She approached the helicopter with practiced confidence, her clipboard in one hand and safety equipment in the other. The 30mm cannon hung beneath the Apache's nose like a predator's fang, waiting to be fed the ammunition that would make it deadly. Maya had loaded these weapons dozens of times in environments far more dangerous than a peaceful training base, but she forced herself to move with the hesitant uncertainty that matched her cover identity. The pilot, a warrant officer named Hayes with 15 years of combat experience and a face that had seen too much, watched from the cockpit as Maya supervised the loading procedure. His eyes tracked her movements with the focused attention of someone who recognized expertise when he saw it, even when that expertise was being deliberately masked. Maya demonstrated the loading sequence to the junior personnel assisting her, her hands moving through the motions, while her voice explained each step. But the explanation came out too smooth, too practiced, peppered with terminology that she should not have known as a simple logistics clerk. Check rotation angle on the feed mechanism before loading. She instructed her fingers adjusting the mounting hardware with unconscious familiarity. The feed pawl should engage at 15 degrees from center. If you hear any grinding during the rotation, cycle stop immediately and check for foreign object debris in the chamber. One of the junior airmen, a kid fresh out of technical school named Patterson, stared at her with confusion. "How do you know all that? They didn't teach us those details in the basic ammunition handling course." Maya froze for a fraction of a second, realizing she had let too much real knowledge slip through her carefully maintained facade. She forced her voice into something more uncertain. I read the technical manual. All the details are in there if you study the appendices." "I've read that manual cover to cover," Patterson said, still confused. "That specific rotation angle and the listening for grinding noises, that's troubleshooting information that only experienced armament crew would know. Where did you really learn this?" Before Maya could formulate a response that would not raise more questions, Warrant Officer Hayes called down from the cockpit, his voice carrying clearly over the dying whine of the helicopter's engine. "You rotate ordnance professionally, petty officer." That technique looked military aviation standard, not basic handling protocol. "Just following procedure, sir." Maya kept her head down, focusing on the ammunition feed. "That wasn't procedure, that was expertise." Hayes climbed down from the cockpit and walked around to observe her work more closely. His eyes caught on the burn scars visible on Maya's hands when she reached for another ammunition canister, old marks from handling weapons that had been fired repeatedly and overheated the barrel. Those scars told a story to anyone who knew how to read them. They spoke of someone who had worked with crew-served weapons under combat conditions, someone who had been close enough to hot barrels to suffer burns and had continued working anyway. They did not belong on the hands of a logistics clerk who allegedly spent her days behind a desk. Hayes said nothing, but his expression shifted from casual observation to focused assessment. He stood watching Maya complete the loading procedure with a precision that came from muscle memory trained over years, not weeks. Every movement was economical. Every safety check was automatic. Every adjustment to the ammunition feed was executed with the kind of confidence that only came from extensive experience. When the loading was complete and the ammunition count verified, Hayes stopped Maya as she turned to leave. His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. "I've been flying Apaches for 16 years, petty officer. I've worked with ordnance crews on 4 continents. What I just watched was not the work of someone who learned from a technical manual. That was professional-grade expertise. Special operations grade if I'm any judge. Who are you really?" Maya met his eyes directly for just a moment, weighing the risks of maintaining silence against the risks of letting even a small piece of truth escape. In the end, she chose the same path she had chosen every other time, absolute denial through perfect submission. "Just a logistics clerk doing her assigned job, sir. Nothing more." Hayes held her gaze for several long seconds, clearly not believing a word, but unwilling to press further without more evidence. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right then. Carry on, petty officer, and Chen. Whatever you're really doing here, be careful. This base has eyes watching things that should remain hidden." He walked away before Maya could ask what he meant by that. leaving her standing in the heat with her heart pounding and another crack showing in her carefully maintained cover. Too many people were starting to notice. Too many questions were accumulating. The investigation needed to conclude soon before something forced her hand and blew 3 months of work. If you're as intrigued as we are about Maya's hidden past, show your support by hitting that like button right now. The mystery is about to deepen, and trust us, you don't want to miss what happens next. Share this video with anyone who appreciates stories about real warriors. Let's continue. Senior Chief Walker found Maya in the warehouse that evening, his expression troubled and his jaw set in a way that suggested he had made a decision he was not entirely comfortable with. He waited until they were alone among the ammunition racks before speaking, his voice low and serious. "Chen, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." He crossed his arms over his chest, body language shifting into interrogation mode. "What's the maximum effective range of an M4 with M855 standard ball ammunition?" Maya did not hesitate. 550 meters for point targets, sir. 800 meters for area targets under ideal conditions. Sustained rate of fire for the M240B machine gun. 100 rounds per minute, sustained 650 to 950 rounds per minute cyclic, depending on gas regulator setting. Barrel change procedure for the M250 caliber. Maya walked him through the entire sequence from memory, including the specific torque requirements for the barrel locking ring and the proper headspace and timing verification procedures. She recited it like someone reading from a technical manual they had memorized years ago, which was exactly what it was, except the memorization had happened during advanced weapons training that had nothing to do with her current assignment. Walker's expression grew darker with each correct answer. When Maya finished, he shook his head slowly. "That information is not in any manual available to logistics personnel. Some of those technical details are only taught in advanced combat arms schools. I'm going to ask you one more time, and I strongly suggest you give me a straight answer. Who are you really, and what are you doing on my base?" Maya considered her options in the space of 2 heartbeats. Walker was smart, observant, and clearly not going to let this drop. She could continue denying everything, but that would only make him more suspicious and might cause him to start asking questions to people who should not be alerted to her presence. Or she could give him just enough truth to satisfy his curiosity while maintaining the core of her cover. She chose a middle path, one that would redirect his attention without revealing the real mission. "I used to work at a different facility, Senior Chief, more specialized training. The details are classified, but I can tell you that I have experience beyond what my current assignment suggests. I was transferred here for personal reasons. Medical leave. The logistics position was supposed to be a quieter assignment while I readjusted to regular duty. It was not entirely a lie. She had been on medical leave after Kandahar, and the logistics position was theoretically supposed to be low stress. The fact that she was actually running a covert investigation was just an additional detail she chose not to mention. Walker studied her face, looking for tells that would indicate deception. Maya kept her expression neutral, but allowed just a hint of vulnerability to show through, the kind that suggested someone dealing with PTSD or other combat-related issues who preferred not to discuss them. "Medical leave," Walker repeated slowly. "From a specialized training facility. And they thought putting you in logistics on a SEAL base where you'd be constantly surrounded by weapons and tactical operations would be therapeutic. The decision wasn't mine to make, Senior Chief." "No, I suppose it wasn't." He was quiet for a long moment, clearly working through the implications. "I'm going to run a background check on you through official channels, not because I doubt your story, but because something doesn't add up, and I have a responsibility to ensure security on this base. If what you're telling me is legitimate, the check will confirm it." Maya nodded, keeping her expression carefully neutral while internally calculating the implications. A standard background check would reveal her official service record, which had been carefully constructed to support her cover identity. Anything beyond her access level would trigger security protocols that would alert her handler that someone was digging into her background. That would start a clock ticking on how long she had before the investigation needed to be wrapped up. "I understand, Senior Chief. Do what you need to do." Walker left without another word, and Maya immediately pulled out her encrypted phone to send a brief message to her handler. 3 words: "Exposure risk elevated." The response came back within 2 minutes. "Maintain cover. timeline accelerated, which meant she now had 1 week instead of 2 to gather the remaining evidence and identify all members of the espionage network. The pressure had just increased exponentially. The next 3 days were a carefully orchestrated dance of maintaining her cover while accelerating her investigation. Maya worked her regular shifts in the warehouse, endured the ongoing harassment from Rodriguez and his cronies, and spent her nights reviewing surveillance footage and communication intercepts that Lieutenant Commander Foster had been feeding her through secure channels. The pattern became clearer with each day. Daniels was the primary contact point, receiving information about SEAL candidate performance and selling it to foreign intelligence services who wanted to identify the best operators for potential recruitment or elimination. Rodriguez and several other trainees were involved in gathering the information, using their access during training exercises to observe and report on specific individuals. Lieutenant Briggs provided administrative cover, falsifying records and ensuring that certain red flags never made it into official channels. But there was still a missing piece. Someone higher up in the command structure had to be coordinating everything, someone with access to classified training schedules and candidate evaluations. Maya had not yet identified that person, and without them, the entire network could not be dismantled. The breakthrough came on day 97 in the form of an equipment malfunction that was not actually a malfunction at all. Maya was conducting a routine inventory check when the primary ammunition tracking system crashed, completely displaying error codes that locked out all administrative access. Senior Chief Walker spent 30 minutes trying to restore functionality before admitting defeat and calling in Maya to assist. She sat down at the terminal and began working through the problem, her fingers moving across the keyboard with a speed that suggested far more computer expertise than a simple logistics clerk should possess. The error codes were actually a deliberate attempt to access secured personnel files, and the digital fingerprints left behind traced directly back to an administrative terminal in Captain Morrison's office. Maya felt her heartbeat accelerate as the implications clicked into place. Morrison was the missing link, the person coordinating the espionage network from his position as executive officer of the base. He had access to everything, authority over nearly everyone, and enough security clearance that his activities would rarely be questioned. She restored the system while carefully preserving the evidence of Morrison's unauthorized access attempt, then filed the incident as a standard equipment glitch that required technical intervention. The real report, the one documenting what had actually happened, went straight to Foster through encrypted channels. The trap was set. Now they just needed to spring it at the right moment, with enough witnesses to ensure that no one could cover up what was about to be exposed. That moment came 2 days later, with an announcement that rippled through the base like electricity through water. A SEAL team commander would be arriving for an unscheduled inspection of training facilities and ammunition handling protocols. The visit was described as routine, but routine inspections were typically scheduled weeks in advance. This one had been arranged with less than 48 hours' notice, which suggested something far more significant was happening behind the official explanation. Maya knew the truth because Foster had briefed her in a midnight meeting in the secure communication room. Commander Jake Steele was coming specifically to verify Maya's findings and to be present when the network was exposed. He was also one of the 6 operators she had extracted from Kandahar 3 years ago, though he had never seen her face during that mission, and had no idea that the quiet logistics clerk he would meet tomorrow was the same person who had saved his life. The morning of the inspection, the entire base transformed into a showcase of military precision. Every piece of equipment was polished to a mirror shine. Every weapon rack was organized with mathematical perfection. Every uniform was pressed and squared away with obsessive attention to detail. The SEAL candidates moved with extra focus, aware that their performance would be evaluated by a legend whose reputation preceded him by decades. Maya arrived at the warehouse at 0600 hours to find that Instructor Daniels had left her a final impossible task: verify and organize 3,000 rounds of mixed ammunition that had been deliberately scattered across the loading benches in a mess that would take hours to sort properly. The inspection was scheduled for 0900 hours. She had 3 hours to complete a job that should have taken 6. She did not complain. She did not ask for help. She simply rolled up her sleeves, exposing the butterfly tattoo that had become a symbol of her alleged weakness, and got to work. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, sorting ammunition by type and lot number, counting and recounting to ensure accuracy, filling out documentation with her usual meticulous attention to detail. The work was mind-numbing in its repetition, but Maya had learned long ago how to enter a mental state where her body continued functioning on autopilot while her mind remained free to observe and plan. At 08:45 hours, with 15 minutes remaining before the inspection, Maya completed the final count and locked the last ammunition case into its designated storage rack. The warehouse was immaculate, every item in its proper place, every form completed and filed correctly. She had given them no ammunition to use against her. At 0900 hours exactly, the rumble of tactical vehicles announced Commander Steele's arrival. Maya heard the convoy pull up outside, heard the sharp cadence of boots on concrete as personnel snapped to attention, heard the crisp exchange of salutes and formal military courtesies that accompanied a senior officer's arrival at a training facility. She stood at the warehouse entrance, clipboard in hand, watching as Commander Jake Steele stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was exactly as she remembered him from the mission file photographs she had reviewed during her preparation for this assignment. 6 feet 2 inches tall, with shoulders that filled out his uniform like he was born wearing it. His face was weathered by years of combat operations lines carved deep around eyes that had seen too much, but maintained a sharp focus that missed nothing. The Navy SEAL trident on his chest seemed to glow with authority, and every person on that range instinctively straightened their posture when his gaze swept across them. He conducted a rapid inspection of the firing range with an efficiency that came from decades of evaluating military readiness. His questions were sharp, technical, designed to expose any weakness in training protocols or safety procedures. Instructors who had seemed confident moments before now stumbled over answers, suddenly aware that their usual standards might not measure up under this level of scrutiny. After 30 minutes of inspection, Steele turned his attention to the ammunition handling procedures. His voice carried clearly across the range, sharp with command authority. "I want to inspect ammunition loading procedures. Where's your ordnance chief?" Master Chief Harris stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Sir, we have a specialist on duty, but she's... I don't care what she is." Steele interrupted his tone, making it clear that gender was irrelevant to his assessment. "I want to see proper protocol. Get her now." Maya was summoned from the warehouse, walking across the range with her head down and her coveralls stained with gun oil from the morning's work. She arrived to find an Apache helicopter sitting on the tarmac, its rotors still and its weapon systems waiting for the demonstration that would either validate or condemn the base's ammunition handling procedures, and possibly expose her identity to 180 witnesses who had spent months making her life miserable. She stood at attention in front of the helicopter, surrounded by SEAL candidates and instructors who watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed contempt. Commander Steele approached with his eyes already assessing her posture, her bearing the way she held herself, despite appearing nervous and small beside the massive attack helicopter. "Demonstrate standard loading procedure," he ordered, his voice carrying no warmth or encouragement. This was a test, and he expected perfection. Maya moved to the ammunition cart and began the loading sequence, her hands moving through the motions, with practiced efficiency that she could not entirely mask. She reached up to secure the 30mm rounds into the cannon's feed mechanism, her movements smooth and precise, each step executed in the exact order that doctrine demanded. That was when her sleeve caught on the ammunition feed housing. The fabric, already worn thin from months of heavy use, tore with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. The tear ran from her wrist all the way up her forearm, exposing the butterfly tattoo in complete, unobstructed detail for the first time since she had arrived at this base. In the harsh California sunlight, hidden details became visible that had never been apparent in the dim warehouse or the shadows of the firing range. The butterfly was not just a butterfly. Within the intricate patterns of its wings, careful observers could now see numbers rendered in a code that looked almost like natural shading: 33.7175 degree N 171 coordinates that marked a valley in Kandahar province. The body of the butterfly contained more numbers in Roman numerals, their followers Beitar Sendorial and Noires, Imisae, August 12, 2019, and in the delicate antennae barely visible unless you knew exactly what to look for, a single word rendered in Morse code dots that looked like decorative details: shadow. Commander Steele stopped breathing. His face, weathered by years of combat and hardened by countless operations, went absolutely white. Every muscle in his body locked rigid as recognition crashed through him with the force of a physical blow. 3 seconds of absolute silence stretched across the firing range. In that silence, 180 people held their breath without understanding why. In that silence, Commander Jake Steele's hand began to rise toward a salute, then froze halfway as his mind tried to process what his eyes were telling him. Then his voice shattered the silence like a grenade detonating in a closed room. "Who put an unauthorized insignia on my deck?" The roar carried across the entire range, with enough force that several trainees actually flinched. It was not anger in his voice. It was shocked disbelief, and something that sounded very much like horror mixed with recognition. Every head turned simultaneously. 180 people froze in place, their attention locked on the small logistics clerk with the torn sleeve and the tattoo that had just revealed itself to be something far more significant than anyone had imagined. Steele's hand completed its upward journey, snapping into a crisp military salute that was held with absolute perfection. His eyes never left the tattoo on Maya's wrist, and his voice when he spoke again was rough with emotion he was struggling to control. Chief Petty Officer Chen, callsign Butterfly, Neptune's Shadow Ghost Unit 7. Each word was enunciated with careful precision, giving weight to a revelation that was changing reality for everyone present. "I didn't know you made it out." The gasp that rippled through the assembled personnel was almost audible. Phones appeared in hands as people scrambled to document this moment without fully understanding what they were witnessing. Trainees who had mocked Maya for months now stood frozen with expressions ranging from shock to dawning horror as they realized what they had done. Instructor Daniel's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. His face had drained of all color, leaving him gray and aged by sudden understanding. "That's not possible," he whispered, though everyone heard him in the stunned silence. "Neptune's shadow is just a legend. It's not real." "It's real," Master Chief Harris said quietly from his position behind the candidates, "and she's one of them." Senior Chief Walker stared at Maya with an expression that suggested his world had just been fundamentally reorganized. "Neptune's shadow, Ghost Unit 7. He turned to the trainee beside him, his voice hollow. "Do you understand what that means? Do any of you understand Trainee Rodriguez, who had spent months tormenting Maya about her butterfly tattoo, looked like he might be sick. His hands were shaking visibly, and when he tried to speak, no sound came out. The realization of exactly who he had been bullying had hit him with the force of a physical assault. Lieutenant Briggs had backed away until she hit the wall of the warehouse, her perfectly composed facade cracking to reveal panic underneath. She understood in that moment that her career was over, and possibly much worse than that, depending on what Maya had documented over the past 3 months. Commander Steele still held his salute, waiting with perfect military bearing for Maya to return it and grant him permission to drop his hand. The moment stretched out, becoming something more than a simple exchange of military courtesy. It was acknowledgement, respect, and the settling of a debt that had been carried for 3 years. Maya's posture transformed completely. The hunched shoulders straightened. The downcast eyes lifted to meet Steele's directly. The trembling hand steadied into the confident grip of someone who had carried wounded operators through enemy fire and never wavered. When she returned the salute, her movements were crisp, precise, carrying the authority of her real rank instead of the cover identity she had maintained for 3 months. "Permission granted, Commander," she said, and her voice was different now. Stronger, clearer, stripped of the hesitant uncertainty she had worn like a disguise. Steele finally lowered his hand, but his eyes never left her face. He reached into his uniform jacket and pulled out a challenge coin, holding it up for everyone to see. The coin's design was identical to Maya's tattoo, a butterfly with hidden coordinates and cryptic numbers embedded in its wings. Kandahar Province, August 12, 2019. Operation Neptune Fury. His voice carried across the range with the solemnity of someone reciting sacred history. "You extracted 7 operators from a hot landing zone under sustained enemy fire, alone, against orders, through 3 kilometers of hostile territory. 6 made it to exfil, sir," Maya corrected quietly. "Lieutenant Davis didn't survive. You carried him the entire 3 clicks with a bullet wound in your shoulder. The after-action report said you refused medical treatment until every other operator was loaded onto the helicopter. Steele's voice cracked slightly on the last words. I was one of the 6 you saved. We never saw your face, never knew your name. Just a voice in the darkness promising us we weren't going to die in that valley. The silence that followed this revelation was absolute. Master Chief Harris finally broke it, his voice sharp with confusion and barely controlled anger. Why wasn't any of this in her personnel file? How is this possible? Lieutenant Commander Rachel Foster stepped forward from where she had been observing from the edge of the crowd. Her intelligence officer's insignia caught the sunlight as she moved into the center of the assembly. Her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes showing satisfaction at a mission finally reaching its conclusion. Because Chief Chen has been operating under deep cover for the past 3 months, Master Chief. She volunteered for an investigation into a security breach within the SEAL training pipeline. Someone has been selling candidate performance information to foreign intelligence services. Chief Chen's assignment was to identify everyone involved in the network. Captain Morrison, who had been watching from his position near the administrative building, went rigid. His face shifted through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, realization, calculation, before settling on a mask of false innocence that fooled absolutely no one who was watching carefully. This is the first I'm hearing of any such investigation, he said, his voice carrying across the range with forced authority. If there's a security concern on my base, I should have been informed immediately. You couldn't be informed, sir, Foster replied with perfect military courtesy that somehow managed to convey absolute contempt. Because you're one of the subjects under investigation. Your administrative terminal was used yesterday to attempt unauthorized access to classified personnel files. The digital fingerprints are conclusive. The trap had sprung. Morrison's expression shifted from false innocence to genuine panic as he realized that months of careful operational security had just evaporated in a single moment of careless exposure. Maya turned to face Instructor Daniels, her posture radiating authority that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with hard-earned expertise. When she spoke, her voice carried the calm certainty of someone who held all the cards and knew exactly how the game would end. Instructor Daniels, I'll need your phone and computer, immediately. Do not attempt to delete anything. We already have copies of all your communications with foreign contacts, but I want the originals for evidence. Daniel's face cycled through shock denial and finally resignation in the space of 3 seconds. You can't just, she outranks you. Commander Steele interrupted his voice, carrying steel beneath the surface calm. And she has authority you really don't want to test. I suggest you comply immediately and save yourself whatever dignity remains. We're approaching the moment that will change everything on that firing range. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and share it with your friends. The revelation you're about to witness will leave you speechless. Stay with us because the commander is about to arrive. Security personnel appeared from the administrative building, moving with practiced efficiency to secure Daniels Rodriguez and 3 other trainees whose names Maya had provided to Foster during her midnight briefing. Lieutenant Briggs attempted to run, but made it less than 20 feet before being intercepted and detained. Her protests echoed across the range, shrill and desperate, claiming she had done nothing wrong, and this was all a misunderstanding. The evidence Maya had gathered over 3 months said otherwise. The surveillance photographs, the documented conversations, the communication intercepts, the financial records showing payments from shell corporations with ties to foreign intelligence services. All of it formed an unbreakable chain connecting each member of the network to the espionage operation they had been running for at least 2 years. Captain Morrison was the last to be detained. He maintained his composure better than the others, standing at attention with his hands clasped behind his back, while security personnel read him his rights and informed him of the charges he would face. But Maya saw the moment when his facade finally cracked, when he looked at her with something like respect mixed with bitter regret. "How long were you here?" he asked quietly as they led him away. "How long were you watching?" 3 months, sir. From the first day I arrived, I was documenting everything. And we never suspected. We thought you were just... He trailed off, unable to complete the sentence that would have damned him further. "Weak," Maya finished for him. "Yes, sir. That was the point. They took him away in handcuffs, and with his removal, the last piece of the espionage network had been dismantled. Maya stood in the center of the firing range, surrounded by 180 people whose understanding of reality had been fundamentally altered in the space of 30 minutes. Senior Chief Walker was the first to approach. He walked slowly, his expression showing a mixture of embarrassment and genuine regret. When he reached Maya, he removed his warfare insignia, the symbol that marked him as a qualified weapons specialist, and offered it to her with both hands. "I should have seen it, Chief. I'm sorry. I questioned your knowledge, doubted your expertise, treated you like you didn't belong here when you were more qualified than anyone on this range." He placed the pin in her palm and closed her fingers around it. "Please accept this as an apology that will never be adequate for how we treated you." Maya looked at the insignia, then back at Walker. "You were doing your job, Senior Chief. You saw inconsistencies and investigated them. That's exactly what a good NCO should do. No apology necessary." "Yes, it is," he insisted. "Because I stopped at investigation instead of offering respect. I let my assumptions about who you appeared to be override what my training told me you actually were." Other personnel began approaching, forming a line of people waiting to apologize or express respect, or simply stand close to someone who had achieved something they could barely comprehend. Gunny Thompson, the Marine armorer who had noticed her technique weeks ago, offered a salute that Maya returned with full military courtesy. "I called your tattoo stupid," Thompson said, his weathered face showing genuine shame. "I was the stupid one. I'm sorry, Chief. You noticed my technique when others didn't, Gunny. That counts for something." Petty Officer Martinez approached with tears streaming down her face. "I watched them hurt you. I saw what they were doing, and I only helped when it was safe. I'm so sorry, Maya. I should have done more." Maya pulled her into a brief embrace, letting Martinez cry against her shoulder for a moment before stepping back. "You helped when you could. You brought me food when I was working all night. You questioned the harassment when others stayed silent. That took courage, too. Don't diminish what you did." Even some of the trainees who had participated in the mockery came forward, though their apologies were halting and inadequate for months of cruelty. Maya accepted each one with professional grace, neither encouraging their guilt nor dismissing it entirely. They would live with what they had done, and that was punishment enough. Seaman recruit Tommy Lee, the young sailor who had witnessed the locker room vandalism approached last. He could not have been more than 19 years old, still baby-faced, and uncertain in his movements. When he spoke, his voice shook with something between awe and determination. "Chief Chen, I want to be like you. I want to serve the way you serve. Will you teach me?" Maya studied his earnest face and saw an echo of the person she had been years ago, before Kandahar, before Neptune's shadow, before the butterfly tattoo had marked her as someone who had earned the right to wear it. "What's your rate, Seaman?" "I'm undesignated chief, still figuring out where I fit." "Then figure it out by watching and learning. Serve with integrity even when no one's watching. Stand up for what's right even when it costs you something. That's what makes a real warrior, not the rate you wear or the weapons you carry." He nodded solemnly, committing her words to memory, like they were holy scripture. Maya suspected she had just gained a devoted follower who would tell this story for the rest of his career, embellishing details with each retelling until the legend grew far beyond the reality. That was fine. Legends served a purpose in military culture, providing examples to aspire toward, even when the truth was more complicated and messy than the stories suggested. Commander Steele had been coordinating with Foster and the security personnel, but now he returned to where Maya stood at the center of a growing circle of respectful witnesses. His expression was complex, mixing professional satisfaction with personal gratitude, and something that looked like lingering disbelief. "Chief Chen, walk with me." It was not a request. Maya followed him away from the crowd toward the far end of the range where they could speak with relative privacy. The California sun beat down on them with relentless heat, but neither seemed to notice. They stood facing each other with 3 years of shared history between them, though only one of them had carried the full weight of that knowledge. "Why didn't you identify yourself when you arrived?" Steele asked. "I could have helped, made this investigation easier." "Because the network needed to feel safe. If they had known what I really was, they would have gone underground, and we never would have caught them all. The harassment, the mockery, the sabotage, all of it made them confident that I was exactly what I appeared to be. Weak, irrelevant, not worth worrying about. 3 months of that." Steele shook his head. Most operators couldn't maintain that kind of cover for 3 days, let alone 3 months. The psychological toll alone was part of the mission, Maya interrupted gently. I've endured worse for longer. Kandahar taught me that I can survive anything if the mission requires it. Steele was quiet for a moment, staring out at the distant mountains that ringed the base. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion he was not quite managing to contain. We searched for you after Kandahar. All 6 of us spent months trying to identify who had come in after us. But your records were so classified that we couldn't even confirm you existed. We had no name, no face, just a voice and a promise that you kept, despite being wounded yourself. The mission required anonymity. Neptune's shadow operates in spaces that officially don't exist, conducting operations that never make it into any history books. That was the deal when I volunteered. Total anonymity in exchange for the freedom to operate without oversight. Was it worth it? The question came out raw and unfiltered. The anonymity, the isolation, the fact that the people you save will never know who you are or what you sacrificed. Maya touched the butterfly tattoo on her wrist, her fingers tracing the hidden coordinates that marked Davis's death, and the successful extraction of 6 other operators who had made it home because she had refused to abandon them. I know, she said simply. That's what matters. I know what I did and why it mattered. External recognition would just be noise. Military personnel serving in high-risk special operations units require specialized comprehensive life insurance policies that account for classified deployment risks. These premium coverage plans offered survivor benefits exceeding standard military policies, with accelerated claim processing for families of operators killed in action during covert missions. Advanced investment portfolios designed specifically for special warfare communities included tax-advantaged military savings accounts, combat zone, tax exclusion, optimization, and estate planning services that protected classified service records while ensuring dependents received full benefits. Financial advisors with security clearances understood the unique needs of operators whose service histories contained redacted sections and provided discrete wealth management that respected operational security requirements. The formal recognition came 3 days later in a ceremony that was technically public, but actually restricted to personnel with appropriate security clearances. The Navy had learned from past mistakes about publicly acknowledging ghost unit operators, so the event was documented but would never be released for general viewing. Maya stood at attention in her dress uniform, with the butterfly tattoo visible on her wrist, no longer hidden or apologized for, but displayed with the pride it had always deserved. Commander Steele conducted the ceremony with formal precision, reading from prepared remarks that captured the essential facts while carefully omitting details that remained classified. Chief Petty Officer Maya Chen has completed a 3-month covert investigation that resulted in the identification and arrest of 7 individuals involved in espionage activities targeting United States naval special warfare operations. Her work has dismantled a foreign intelligence network, prevented the compromise of ongoing operations, and saved countless lives that would have been endangered by continued security breaches. He paused, his eyes meeting Maya's with the weight of shared history behind them. Additionally, Chief Chen's operational record includes 7 classified extractions and the Kandahar Province Rescue designated Operation Neptune Fury, where she single-handedly extracted 6 operators from hostile territory, while wounded herself. For these actions and in recognition of exceptional courage and dedication to duty, Chief Petty Officer Maya Chen is hereby awarded the Navy Cross. The room erupted in applause as Steele pinned the medal to Maya's uniform. The Navy Cross was the second highest military decoration that could be awarded to a member of the United States Navy, given for extraordinary heroism in combat. The fact that she was receiving it for an operation 3 years old, combined with a covert investigation that had just concluded, spoke volumes about the exceptional nature of her service. Captain Morrison's replacement, a Captain Henderson who had arrived the day before with orders to take command of the base and implement new security protocols, stepped forward to add his own remarks. His voice carried the formal stiffness of someone who understood he was witnessing something historically significant. Effective immediately, this facility will implement what we're designating the Chen Protocol. All personnel, regardless of rate or apparent rank, will be treated with respect and dignity. Harassment of any kind will result in immediate investigation and potential separation from service. We will create reporting systems that protect those who come forward with concerns, and we will maintain vigilance against any future attempts to compromise our security. He turned to face Maya directly. Chief Chen, your dedication to this mission, despite extraordinary personal cost, has set a standard that this command will strive to meet going forward. Thank you for your service and your sacrifice. The ceremony concluded with the traditional challenge coin exchange, but this time it was Maya presenting coins to the operators who had supported her investigation, Foster Harris Thompson, and surprisingly Senior Chief Walker, who had inadvertently helped by running the background check that had accelerated the timeline. You each contributed to this mission's success, Maya said as she handed out the coins bearing Neptune's shadow insignia. These are to remember that real strength often works in silence, and the most effective warriors are sometimes the ones nobody sees until the moment they choose to be visible. The informal gathering afterward gave Maya her first opportunity to truly relax since she had arrived at this base 3 months ago. She stood with a glass of water, never alcohol while on duty, and accepted congratulations from personnel who had only hours before treated her with contempt or indifference. The transformation in their behavior would have been funny if it was not also tragic. Dr. Sarah Kim, the base psychologist who had recognized Maya's resilience training during their mandated evaluation, approached with a knowing smile. I suspected there was more to you than met the eye. The response patterns during our session were too controlled, too perfect, like someone who had been trained specifically to pass psychological evaluations. You filed a report noting unusual patterns, Maya acknowledged. That was helpful. It gave me documentation that someone with training was asking the right questions. I'm curious about something. Kim's voice dropped lower, ensuring privacy. How did you maintain the facade for so long? The harassment alone should have triggered defensive responses, but you never once broke character. That level of control isn't natural. It's trained, Maya corrected. Neptune's shadow operators spend months learning to subsume their natural responses in favor of mission requirements. We practice being weak when we're strong, ignorant when we're expert, forgettable when we're exceptional. It's psychological warfare turned inward. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also necessary. The moment you let your real self show through the cover is compromised and the mission fails. So, you become very good at living inside a character that isn't you wearing it so completely that sometimes you forget where the mask ends and you begin. Kim studied her with professional assessment. Will you be able to take off the mask now? Or has it been on so long that you've forgotten what your real face looks like? The question hit harder than Maya expected, touching something she had carefully avoided thinking about during the months of maintaining her cover. She looked down at her butterfly tattoo at the hidden coordinates and coded information that marked her as someone who had earned the right to serve in the shadows. I think the mask might be the real face now, she said quietly. I've been Maya Chen, the logistics clerk, for 3 months, but before that, I was a dozen other identities for other missions. At some point, the collection of masks becomes who you actually are. The person underneath might not exist anymore. That's a concerning psychological state, Chief. Have you considered therapy? Maya smiled, though it did not quite reach her eyes. Therapy would require talking about operations that officially never happened to people who aren't cleared to know they exist. The logistics get complicated. There are therapists with appropriate clearances, maybe when the next mission ends, and the one after that. Maya shook her head. But there's always another mission, Doctor. That's the nature of this work. The shadows don't run out of darkness just because one operation concludes. Yeoman Jackson, the admin clerk who had questioned Maya's thin personnel file, joined their conversation with an apologetic expression. Chief, I wanted to apologize for not digging deeper when I noticed discrepancies in your records. I should have reported the inconsistencies instead of just filing them away. If you had reported them, you would have alerted the network that someone was paying attention to the wrong details. Your silence actually helped the investigation. Maya offered him a genuine smile. Sometimes the most effective action is knowing when not to act. That's a very Zen philosophy for a special operator. Special operations is largely about patience, Maya replied. Anyone can kick down a door and start shooting. Real expertise comes from waiting for exactly the right moment to act and having the discipline to remain still until that moment arrives. The gathering continued for another hour before people began filtering away to return to their regular duties. Maya found herself alone with Commander Steele and Lieutenant Commander Foster, the three of them standing on the observation deck, overlooking the firing range where this whole operation had reached its climax. "What happens now?" Foster asked, her voice carrying both professional curiosity and personal concern. "Your cover here is completely blown. You can't exactly go back to loading ammunition and filing paperwork." "No," Maya agreed. "But that was always going to be the endpoint. This investigation was designed to conclude with exposure. The question is, what comes after?" Steele pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to Maya. "Orders from Naval Special Warfare Command. You're being assigned as primary instructor for a new counterintelligence training program. You'll be teaching SEAL candidates and other special operations personnel how to identify and resist intelligence collection efforts using everything you learned during this investigation as curriculum material." Maya opened the envelope and scanned the orders. Her expression neutral, but her mind already working through the implications. Teaching meant staying in one place instead of moving from operation to operation. It meant stability and routine instead of constant adaptation. It meant her face would become known instead of remaining anonymous. It meant the shadows were releasing her back into the light, at least temporarily. "This is a significant shift from operational work," she said carefully. "Are you sure I'm the right person for this position?" "You just spent 3 months demonstrating exactly why you're the right person," Steele replied. "You understand how intelligence networks operate because you've lived inside one while simultaneously investigating it. You know what signs to look for, what behaviors indicate compromise, what patterns suggest someone is selling information they shouldn't have access to. That expertise is too valuable to keep locked away in classified after-action reports. Besides," Foster added with a slight smile, "someone needs to teach the next generation of operators that strength isn't always loud and obvious. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. You've proven that lesson in a way that will be remembered for decades. The truth is finally out, but Maya's mission isn't over yet. If this story moved you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more true tales of military courage and sacrifice. Check out our next video in the end screen about another warrior who operated in the shadows. Until next time, stay safe and never forget the heroes among us." 3 months later, Maya stood in a classroom at the Advanced Training Center, addressing a group of 30 SEAL candidates who eyed her with expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. She was still smaller than most of them, still quiet in her demeanor, still wearing the butterfly tattoo on her wrist that had become something of a legend in special operations circles. "My name is Chief Petty Officer Maya Chen," she began, her voice calm and professional. "Call sign Butterfly. For the next 6 weeks, I'm going to teach you how to identify intelligence threats, how to resist collection efforts, and how to operate in environments where your enemies will try to exploit every weakness they can find." One of the candidates, a muscular man who looked like he could bench press a car, raised his hand with barely concealed skepticism. "With respect, Chief, what qualifies you to teach us about intelligence operations? You look like—" He trailed off, clearly unsure how to complete that sentence without causing offense. "Like a logistics clerk," Maya finished for him. "Like someone who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of special operations. Like someone weak and unprepared for the realities of combat." The candidate shifted uncomfortably, but nodded. Maya smiled, and there was nothing soft in the expression. "That's exactly the point. In 3 months working at a training facility very similar to this one, I was mocked, harassed, sabotaged, and dismissed as irrelevant by 180 personnel who never suspected that the weak logistics clerk was actually investigating an espionage network that had been operating under their noses for 2 years. She let that sink in for a moment, watching comprehension dawn on their faces. I documented 7 individuals selling SEAL candidate information to foreign intelligence services. I identified their methods, traced their communication channels, and gathered enough evidence to ensure convictions for all of them. I did this while maintaining a cover identity so complete that trained special operators never questioned it, even when I demonstrated skills that should have raised immediate red flags. The skeptical candidate's expression had shifted from doubt to rapt attention. "How?" he asked simply. "By understanding that real strength doesn't announce itself, by recognizing that the most effective warriors are often invisible until the moment they choose to be seen, by accepting that sometimes the most difficult mission isn't the one where you're storming an enemy position. It's the one where you have to stand perfectly still while people who should know better treat you like you're worthless. She rolled up her sleeve, exposing the butterfly tattoo fully. This mark represents an operation where I extracted 6 wounded operators from hostile territory while injured myself. For 3 years, people mocked this tattoo without understanding what it meant. During those 3 years, I conducted 8 more classified operations while maintaining cover identities that made me appear weak, incompetent, and harmless. Maya moved to the center of the classroom, her voice taking on an edge that suggested personal experience rather than academic theory. The lesson you need to learn is this: your enemies will always underestimate someone who appears weak. They will dismiss threats that don't match their expectations, and they will absolutely fail to recognize expertise that's wrapped in humility and silence. That's what makes quiet warriors so dangerous, not in spite of appearing weak, but because of it. The classroom was absolutely silent. Now, 30 candidates absorbing lessons that contradicted much of what they had been taught about strength and military bearing and the proper way to demonstrate competence. For the next 6 weeks, you're going to learn how intelligence networks operate. You'll study the methods they use to identify and recruit sources. You'll practice recognizing when someone is collecting information they shouldn't have access to. And you'll develop the psychological resilience necessary to maintain operational security even when you're being pressured, harassed, or manipulated by people who want you to break. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the class with an intensity that suggested she could see directly into each person's character. Some of you will fail this course, not because you're not physically capable or tactically proficient, but because you can't let go of the need to be recognized. You can't stomach the idea of appearing weak even when weakness is strategically advantageous. You can't maintain a cover identity that contradicts your self-image as an elite warrior. Those of you who succeed will understand what I learned in that warehouse while people laughed at my butterfly tattoo. Real warriors don't need recognition to validate their service. We serve in silence because the mission requires it, and we find satisfaction in the work itself, rather than the praise it might generate. The first week of training tested this lesson in the most direct way possible. Maya assigned the candidates to work regular jobs on base, administrative positions, logistics roles, maintenance duties, while simultaneously conducting surveillance and gathering intelligence on a fictional espionage network that she and Foster had constructed specifically for this exercise. The candidates struggled. They hated appearing weak or incompetent. They bristled at being ordered around by personnel they outranked in operational capability, even if not in administrative authority. They broke cover constantly by demonstrating skills or knowledge that contradicted their assigned identities. Maya documented every failure with meticulous attention, then played back recordings of their mistakes in classroom sessions that were simultaneously embarrassing and enlightening. You were assigned to work in the base cafeteria as a dishwasher. She told one candidate who had correctly assembled a disassembled M4 in under 30 seconds when he thought no one was watching. A dishwasher would not have that skill set. Your need to demonstrate competence just compromised a 6-week operation and potentially got 3 other operators killed because the network now knows someone is investigating them. The lesson was harsh but effective. By week 3, the candidates had begun to understand that maintaining cover required suppressing their natural instincts and accepting temporary humiliation in service of longer-term mission success. By week 5, several of them had successfully maintained their cover identities for 72 continuous hours while conducting surveillance and gathering intelligence without arousing any suspicion. Maya pushed them harder, introducing complications and pressures designed to force mistakes. She arranged for them to be harassed by other personnel. She sabotaged their equipment and blamed them for the failures. She created impossible situations where maintaining cover meant accepting unjust punishment without defending themselves. Those who couldn't handle it dropped from the program. Those who remained learned lessons that would save their lives and the lives of their teammates during future operations, where invisibility mattered more than visible strength. On the final day of the course, Maya gathered the 17 candidates who had successfully completed all requirements. They stood in the same classroom where the course had begun 6 weeks earlier, but they carried themselves differently now. more aware, more patient, less concerned with demonstrating their capabilities to anyone who might be watching. "You've learned to be invisible," Maya told them. "That makes you more dangerous than any amount of physical strength or tactical training ever could. When you deploy on your next operation, remember what you discovered during these 6 weeks. The enemy is always watching for warriors who look like warriors. They're not watching for the quiet person in the corner who appears weak and forgettable. That's your advantage. Use it." She distributed certificates marking their completion of the course, along with challenge coins bearing the butterfly insignia that had become associated with her unique approach to special operations. "These coins represent a promise," she said as she handed them out. "A promise that you'll serve with integrity even when no one's watching, that you'll choose mission success over personal recognition, that you'll protect your teammates by maintaining operational security no matter what pressure you're under. Can you keep that promise?" 17 voices answered in unison, "Yes, Chief." Maya smiled, seeing echoes of herself in their determination and their newly developed understanding that strength came in forms beyond the obvious. "Then get out there and do work that will never be acknowledged by anyone except the people you save. That's the highest calling any warrior can answer." The course became the foundation for a new training pipeline that was eventually integrated into SEAL qualification requirements. Maya taught 12 iterations of the program over the next 3 years, training more than 200 operators in techniques that transformed how naval special warfare approached counterintelligence operations. Her butterfly tattoo became legendary in special operations circles, not as a symbol of weakness, but as a reminder that the most dangerous warriors were often the ones nobody saw until they chose to be visible. Stories spread about the quiet chief, who had endured 3 months of harassment while investigating an espionage network, who had carried wounded operators through enemy fire without recognition, who had proven that real strength often operated in silence. But the ending that mattered most to Maya came on a quiet evening 5 years after the Kandahar extraction, when she received a letter forwarded through so many classified channels that the envelope was covered in security markings. Inside was a single photograph showing 6 men in dress uniforms, all of them alive and healthy, all of them wearing challenge coins with butterfly insignias. On the back, written in 6 different hands, was a simple message: "Thank you for keeping your promise. We made it home because you didn't give up. We'll never forget, even if we'll never know your name." The men who lived. Maya pinned the photograph above her desk where she could see it every day. It was the only recognition she needed, proof that her work mattered, that her sacrifices had meaning, that serving in silence did not mean serving without purpose. The butterfly on her wrist remained as it had always been, a memorial, a promise, and a reminder that real warriors measured their success not by the medals on their chest, but by the lives they saved and the missions they completed, while everyone else was looking elsewhere. She had kept her promise to those 6 operators. She had kept her promise to serve with integrity regardless of recognition. And she would continue keeping those promises for as long as she wore the uniform and carried the weight of secrets that officially never existed. That was enough. That was everything. That was what it meant to be a warrior who operated in the shadows and found satisfaction in work that would never be fully acknowledged by the world that benefited from it. Real warriors don't advertise. They serve. And in that service, they find purpose that no amount of recognition or acknowledgement could ever equal. Following unauthorized disclosure of classified operational details, military legal consultation services became essential for operators navigating the complex intersection of national security law and personal rights. Attorneys specializing in military justice and security clearance cases provided confidential representation for personnel facing investigation, ensuring proper procedures were followed when classified records were accessed or disseminated. These legal professionals, many former JAG officers with special operations experience, understood the nuances of special access programs and could advocate effectively while maintaining the strict confidentiality required for personnel operating under deep cover assignments. Educational programs in operational security and legal rights helped service members protect both their missions and their careers. But Maya's story did not end with quiet satisfaction and philosophical acceptance of service without recognition. 5 years after Kandahar and 3 years into her teaching assignment, she was working late in her office reviewing training materials when her encrypted phone vibrated with an incoming call. The number was blocked. The encryption protocols were beyond anything normally used for routine military communications, and when she answered, the voice on the other end was distorted by digital scrambling that made it impossible to identify the speaker. "Butterfly," the voice said, somehow making the call sign sound like both greeting and threat. Maya's hand tightened on the phone. Her office door was locked, her windows were covered, and her computer screen displayed only benign training documentation. She had learned long ago to be prepared for unexpected contact, even during what should have been safe moments. "Who is this?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. "Someone who knows what you did in Kandahar, someone who knows about the 8th operator." Maya's blood turned to ice in her veins. There were 7 operators on that mission. 6 survived extraction. Lieutenant Davis died from his wounds. Those are the only numbers that exist in any report. And yet we both know that's not the complete truth, don't we? Chief, the distorted voice carried a hint of amusement underneath its electronic disguise. Operation Neptune Fury had 8 personnel on the ground when the compromise occurred, 7 operators, and 1 intelligence analyst who was never officially part of the mission, but somehow ended up coordinating the extraction from inside the enemy facility. Maya said nothing, her mind racing through implications and possibilities and threat assessments. The 8th person had been removed from all official records because their presence in that facility was part of a completely separate operation that had intersected with Neptune Fury in ways that were still classified above her clearance level. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said carefully. "Of course you don't. Just like you don't know that the 8th person was declared killed in action 6 months after Kandahar body never recovered, presumed lost during an unrelated operation in Syria. Except, I have evidence suggesting they're not dead at all. I have surveillance images showing someone matching their description at 3 different locations over the past 2 years. The caller paused, letting that information sink in. Maya forced herself to remain still, to keep her breathing even, to give nothing away, despite the shock rolling through her nervous system. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked. "Because you're the only person who ever saw their face during Neptune Fury. You're the only one who could identify them if you saw them again. And because if they're alive and hiding instead of coming forward, that suggests something went very wrong. Maybe something that connects to the intelligence network you just finished dismantling." Another pause, this one heavy with implication. "I'm sending you a file. Don't open it on any network device. Don't discuss it with anyone except through channels you absolutely trust. And Chief, watch your back. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make the 8th operator disappear. They might not appreciate you digging into reasons why." The call disconnected, and 30 seconds later, Maya's phone received a heavily encrypted file through a secure transfer protocol she had only seen used by the most classified intelligence services. She stared at the file without opening it, her mind working through a decision tree that had suddenly become far more complicated than any training exercise could prepare someone for. She could delete the file and pretend this call never happened, returning to her safe teaching position and letting someone else handle whatever conspiracy was being suggested. Or she could open it and potentially discover that everything she thought she knew about Kandahar was incomplete or deliberately misleading. Maya stood and walked to her window, looking out at the darkening sky over Naval Base San Diego, the same base where she had spent 3 months being mocked and harassed while investigating traitors in their midst. The same base where her butterfly tattoo had been revealed and her identity exposed and her years of silent service finally acknowledged by people who mattered. She thought about the 6 operators who had survived because she kept her promise to extract them from that valley. She thought about Lieutenant Davis, who had died despite everything she could do. And now she thought about the mysterious 8th person whose existence had been classified so far above her clearance that even discovering their name might constitute a security violation. If they were alive and hiding, there had to be a reason. If that reason connected to the intelligence network she had spent 3 months dismantling, then her work was not actually finished. And if finishing it meant going back into the shadows after finally stepping into the light, well, that was what warriors did when the mission required it. Maya pulled out a tablet computer that had never been connected to any network, a device maintained specifically for reviewing highly classified materials in secure environments. She transferred the encrypted file and opened it with credentials that technically should not work anymore, but somehow still granted access. Inside the file was a collection of surveillance photographs taken at different times and locations over the past 3 years. The quality varied from crystal clear to grainy and indistinct, but one face appeared in all of them, a person Maya had last seen in Kandahar 5 years ago, moments before the facility was overrun and the extraction became necessary. They were supposed to be dead. The after-action reports said they had been killed 6 months after Kandahar during a classified operation in Syria. But these photographs showed them alive, seemingly healthy, moving through crowds in locations spanning 3 continents. The most recent photograph was date-stamped 4 weeks ago. The location was redacted, but the background showed architectural details that Maya recognized from her own training, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, home of Special Operations Command, home to some of the most highly classified units in the American military. The 8th operator was not just alive, they were active. They were operating on American soil near sensitive military facilities, and for some reason, they had chosen to remain hidden instead of resurfacing and explaining their survival. Maya studied each photograph with the focused attention of someone trained to extract intelligence from minimal information. She noted clothing choices, behavioral patterns, the way they moved through spaces with constant awareness of exit routes and potential threats. This was someone still operating under tradecraft protocols, still maintaining security procedures, still behaving like an active intelligence asset. But working for whom and why the elaborate deception about their death? The file contained one additional document, a brief intelligence summary, suggesting that the 8th operator had been present at 3 locations where classified information leaks occurred. Not proven connections, just suspicious proximity that might indicate involvement, or might indicate they were investigating the same things Maya had been investigating at her base. The summary concluded with a single question rendered in red text, asset or threat. Maya closed the file and sat in darkness watching the night settle over the base outside her window. She had spent years learning to operate in shadows and silence to maintain covers that contradicted her real capabilities to serve without recognition, because the mission mattered more than personal acknowledgement. This felt like the shadows calling her back, like unfinished business from Kandahar reaching forward through time to demand resolution, like a choice between the comfortable teaching position she had earned and the dangerous investigation that would risk everything she had built. It was not really a choice at all. She had made this decision years ago when she volunteered for Neptune's Shadow, when she accepted that real service often meant going places where no one would ever know what she had sacrificed. Maya pulled out her encrypted phone and composed a brief message to Lieutenant Commander Foster, now promoted to commander and running counterintelligence operations across multiple theater commands. Need to discuss historical case. Urgent. In person only. The response came back within minutes. My office, 0600 tomorrow. Come alone. Maya looked down at the butterfly tattoo on her wrist at the hidden coordinates and encoded information that marked her as someone who had earned the right to ask dangerous questions and pursue answers that officially should not exist. The butterfly had been a memorial for Lieutenant Davis and a symbol of the promise she had kept to 6 operators who survived. Now it might become something else, a reminder that some missions never truly ended, they just evolved into new phases that required different kinds of courage. She had kept her promise once before in Kandahar. She would keep it again, even if that meant discovering that everything she thought she knew about that mission was incomplete or deliberately false. Even if it meant going back into deep cover and sacrificing the recognition she had finally earned. Even if it meant becoming invisible again while hunting ghosts that were supposed to be dead, but apparently still walked among the living. Real warriors served without recognition. They operated in silence. They finished missions regardless of personal cost. Maya Chen had proven all of that during 3 months of enduring mockery while investigating traitors. She was about to prove it again by chasing shadows that might lead her somewhere far darker than a simple espionage network on a training base. The butterfly remained on her wrist, patient and permanent, waiting for her to decide what came next. Maya traced its outline one more time, feeling the raised ink beneath her fingertips, remembering everything it represented. Then she began preparing for the meeting that would either put her back in the shadows or prove that some secrets were better left buried in classified files that no one should ever open. Either way, the mission continued. It always continued. That was the nature of service in the darkness where real warriors operated, and where the most important battles were often fought by people whose names would never be recorded in any history anyone would ever read. And Maya Chen had always been comfortable in the dark.